Hello and welcome to this new Blender tutorial. In this one we're going to talk about procedural textures, how to make them, how to approach them, and by the end of the video you should have something that looks like this. A procedural painted metal material, and yeah, without any further ado, let's hop straight into it. For the majority of the video we're going to use cycles, and I'm going to just delete the default lamp, import an HDRI which I've downloaded from hdrihaven.com, and that's about it. I'm going to add in a new plane, move it down, make it a bit bigger, and give it some black color just so that we have some contrast while looking at this cube. And since we're already at it, we can just add a bevel modifier with about 4 segments, and I'm going to just choose 0.45 for the radius, and we should be good to go. So, since we want to make a custom painted metal material, how are we going to approach this? So this is aiming at people that haven't really dived into procedural textures before, so listen up. What we're going to do now is define the area where we're going to have paint and where we're going to have metal. So the way we're going to do this is actually fairly straightforward. We are going to import a map, a procedural map, which will be controlling that. So depending on what we want, we would need to import different maps, but the most common is the noise texture. So simply by plugging that into the base color, we can see that it has changed a little bit. Now some things are becoming black, some things are becoming white, or rather something in between with those two. But if we want a little bit more control, we can have a mix RGB shader and plug this here into the factor. And what that does is it uses the factor of the noise texture for a factor of a mix between those two colors. Black will be the upper color and white will be the lower color. So if I change this here to blue and this here to red, you can see that it's mostly purple because it's neither fully black, neither fully white in any of the areas. The way we can change that is simply by going here, pressing Shift A and searching for a color ramp and putting it in between here. That in itself doesn't do much, but the way we can help it is by crunching the blacks a fair bit. Let's go to about 0.5, a little bit less, and this also to 0.5, a little bit more than that. And we should get crisp and clear lines. Now let's set the saturation back, and I want this here to be black and this here to be white. Now why not simply use the color ramp for it, because that way we can change it later. So now that we have that, let's just put this color from the color ramp into the metallic shader, or the metallic input. And now we can see that everything that is white is metal, and everything that is black is not metal or paint. So, but now it looks like a metallic cow. So how can we change that? Well, normally when you chip away paint from metal, it doesn't have such smooth lines. And we could actually crank this up a little bit more so that it gets a little bit crisper, but that is not the only point. Right now it is still very blobby. The way we can change that is by cranking up the detail. And now you can see it looks like chipped away paint basically. You could further emphasize this with the roughness, but I do not recommend playing around with that too much because that can give some really weird and scattering results like this. Maybe you find a use for it, maybe for rust. This would be very, very good, but let's just keep that at about 0.5-ish. That should be looking good. So now you can see we have this here and we have this here independently. So wherever it's black, we can change the color to be whatever we want. But the metal doesn't quite look like metal, and right now we have a very uniform roughness. We cannot change the roughness of the paint and the metal independently. So how can we change that? We can simply take another mix RGB and plug this color ramp again into this factor and put it into the roughness. Now it again has uniform roughness because we're literally mixing the two of the same colors. But let's just say, for instance, that we want the metal to be at about 0.25. We can see that the roughness of the metal decreased while the paint stayed the same. And that is basically the principle of procedural textures, that you can basically adjust a lot of things. You have infinite detail because this is all math based, and you do not have to worry about image textures, resolutions and all of that. And yeah, if you want to change this, because it still doesn't look right, because if you chipped away metal with anything like scratches or something, it wouldn't look so perfect. How can I explain this? I'm going to just change this to adaptive sampling so it renders a bit faster, and use open image denoise because I have an AMD graphics card. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, I would suggest choosing optics, but this is the best option for me. So what can we do to make this a little bit better? We can simply take a noise texture and plug it into the color 2. And as you can see, we already have some darker spots, some brighter spots, but that is not perfect by any means yet. So let's get us another color ramp. And what does that do? Absolutely nothing yet. But what we can do is enable the Node Wrangler add-on on the Edit Preferences, and then when we go to Add-ons, we need to look for Node, check this box, then we're good to go. Then we can Control-Shift-Click on the node to see what it does, to see what it looks like. So what I want to do is simply bump up the scale to something like, I don't know, 15 looks good, and then crank the blacks up. We want to stop when we get pure black spots like these and these. So right about here, and then I want to have more contrast, more detail, and now we can play with the roughness a bit to make it a little more chaotic. So let's play around with this value again, bump it up quite a bit, and then we can make this here darker to make it less rough in some areas. And then you can see we have some frosted metalish kind of thing going on, which looks quite good. But right now we have the paint and the metal in one plane basically, which is okay, but once you get in a little bit closer, you can see that it is basically 2D, and we want to avoid things like that. So how can we do that? Simply by looking for a bump texture. We're going to plug the normal into the normal, and then we wanna take this here and put it into the height. And right now you can see that something is happening, but we cannot quite figure out what. But I think, yeah, the paint is eating into the metal. It should be the other way around. So let's invert this. Now you can see the paint is standing out of the metal, but it's quite by a large amount. So let's just make this less drastic by changing the distance. Now this looks a little better, but not perfect yet. Let's make this smaller and again, and that looks about right. Usually, paint is kind of rough, but it has a sort of clear coat on itself. And when I look here from the side, this is okay for paint, but as I said, it should have some shine to it. So how can we add that? Simply by dragging this here into the clear coat. But now the metal has the clear coat, and that is an issue because, well, when we chipped away the paint, there is a low percentage or chance that underneath the paint would be a clear coat, and that it even would be usable after we chipped away the paint above it. So what we can do to fix this is simply invert this, and then you can see that the clear coat is above the paint and not the metal anymore. So that is one thing, but how can we actually adjust the amount of clear coat? By the way, what we did now is, I remember when we said that black represents 0 and white represents 1, and that this here is basically black and this here is white. Well, same thing happened here, and there was no clear coat wherever the paint was, because that is the slide above on the mix RGB, Now we inverted it, so this here basically becomes white and this here becomes black. But now how do we adjust the amount of clear coat? We can simply take a math node. Right now it's set to add, so everything has more clear coat now, which isn't good. But we can set it to multiply, and right now there's a lot of black, and black multiplied by 0.5 is still 0, so 0 times 0.5 is 0. And 0 times, let's just say 10, is also 0. 1 times 10 is 10. So that is why we have even more clear coat on there now. And theoretically, we could just go like 0.4, and then we would have 0.4 of clear coat, just as the slider would suggest. So now that we have done that, we could add some edge damage, because, you know, when you chip away the paint, there is a very low percentage of a chance that these edges would actually crumble like this. They would more likely just have little nicks and crannies here, because the paint wouldn't really be able to sustain itself on edges. Edges are usually where paint chips away the fastest, so let's get this here out of the way. And I'm going to show you a new trick, which is only usable for cycles. So we're going to look for a geometry node, and look at this, we have a pointiness slider here. And that is basically, or not a slider, a pointiness output. So that basically outputs how pointy something is. And basically this bevel here points as pointiness, or counts as pointiness. Can't talk, sorry. So what we want to do is get a color ramp again. The color ramp is one of the most effective things when it comes to procedural texturing. Again, with the noise texture, they're basically used in every single procedural texture I know of. You're rarely going to find one without those two. So what we can observe now is that we have just a huge pile of gray with no contrast whatsoever. What we can do is simply bump this up, and you should be able to see a fine line. What we're going to do now is move this just so far that it becomes black. This here becomes white, and we do not want to have any of the colors spilling out. So we don't want gray here or anything like that. We have to have pure black. And then for the white, it's not that important if it's purely white or not, but we just want to make sure that there's no white on the black parts. So this is good, this is fine. And now what we can do is simply mix this here with this here in order to subtract this color from the metal. So we're going to use a mix RGB, plug it in here, and basically we're going to plug this in here and look at it. Okay, so this here is black, and wherever there is black, there's going to be color, right? So let's set this to add, and we're going to have this here. Set it to 1. But as you can see, it's still not really showing through, because there is basically some gray in here, so it's not completely white. So what we need to do is take a math node, plug it in here, and set it to multiply. Let's just multiply it by a stupid amount, like 100. So now it's completely white. Set this to clamp, and now you can see that it has the same tone as this here. And once we look at our principal PSTF, we can see that we have taken away the color from that part. But it is not metallic. Why is that? Because we need to use this here as our new factor for everything. So once we plug this into the metallic, you can see that it is metallic. Once we plug this into our roughness, we can see that it changes the roughness. We can plug this here in here so that it controls the clear coat, and we can control the bump again with that. Well, we could technically say that we're done here, but let's just fiddle around with this a little bit longer, because now we've taken away all the paint. Maybe we want to just take away some of the paint. How can we do that? We can have a chipped away paint effect simply by putting something in between those here. And that would be a mixed RGB again. And another noise texture. I'm just going to copy this one and plug it in here. So what we can observe now is that we basically have a lot of influence from the noise texture. If I set this here to 0, we're going to have no influence by it, and this here is going to be straight lines. So let's just put it to 0.01. We can see that we have a little bit of distortion. Let's just bump this up here to, let's just say 150. And now you can see that you have a lot of chipped away paint. We can set it to even larger amounts, like 250. And that will give us a nice looking effect. You can see some areas are chipped away, but it's not perfectly straight. You have something that is still going in there. So that is looking fine. Let's try something even finer. That is too fine. I think I liked 250 better. Let's try 300. Yeah. So that is the basic principle of using procedural textures and nodes in order to make something like this. You could, of course, tip the balance of everything by just saying, hey, I don't want this much metal, I want more paint. So let's just say we grab this, bring it over here, bring that closer to here. And now we have some of the paint removed. And of course, we have again our edges independently. So we can just play around with this, have very unique results, and basically make it our own. We can even change this here. If we set it to 4D, we have some sort of seed, which is the W amount. So we can play around with that, just have a different kind of look to it, even though we don't change the scale. And I think it's quite nice. We can even change the distortion so that we get some distorted chipaways. Maybe that's what you're into, but I like to just keep the distortion at 0. That gives me some nice results. You can of course change the color still and everything else like that. And yeah, I hope you liked this tutorial, and I will see you in the next one. See ya, bye.
If you ever wanted to support my friend Philip with a small donation on the internet, then check out his Gumroad account, where he started selling his first items. This is not Jeremy Clarkson, and it is also not Top Gear.